Great. We're about to get started. Thank you guys who have joined us here on LinkedIn Land for this LinkedIn Live session. Today, we're doing all things 2025 predictions for the threat and cyber intelligence industry. And with me today to weigh in on this, I've got a really packed panel of experts. First, I've got Jordan Brett, who is a senior geopolitical analyst at Creolytics. Then I have Mike Evans, who is the director of the Risk Intelligence Center at Securitas. And then I've got Neil Spencer, the VP of Product Strategy at LifeRaft. And I am Beverly, your host, also from LifeRaft. Now, to prepare us for this session, we did a lot of research to kind of look at what kind of chatter was in the industry about what to expect for 2025 and looked at some other predictions that other pundits had. And so we've got a list of things that we have secured or pinpointed that we're going to ask our panelists their opinions on in terms of validity or if they've got a new take. With that being said, if you are listening and you too have something that you've been pondering and wondering the validity of in terms of a 2025 thing to be concerned about, please drop it in the chat and we'll try to address those in the 30 minutes or the 28 minutes we now have. So I'm going to jump right into it. Thank you, panelists, for being here. I appreciate your time. The first one that I have, I mean, it's hard to do these types of conversations without artificial intelligence being a part of it. And I know people are rolling their eyes because we've talked about it and heard about it so much, but it's still a segment of our world and technology that is morphing every single day, and we're surprised by what it does. So Neil, I'm going to come to you first with this question. So the prediction that we are looking at, I'm going to read it word for word, is AI-driven security operations center co-pilots will revolutionize security operations, helping process large volumes of data and prioritize threats. Now, Neil, when we read this, what made this interesting for us is that in talking to our friends in the industry, in the security industry, a lot of them still look at AI with some skepticism, right? They're doubting the security of the data. If I input something, how secure is that data for me to get that output from artificial intelligence? They're concerned about bias in the system. They're concerned about accuracy. So given those notions from those that we speak to in the industry, how valid is this prediction when it comes to AI, and or do you have a different take on the topic?
Yeah, great question. And I think, like I say, it's tough to ignore AI in the current sphere. The long and short of it is that trend and certainly we at LifeRaft see as being valid. Certainly the co-pilot, and I'm going to really be clear about that, the co-pilot element of AI will be a game changer and already has started to be a game changer in the security sphere. Using AI to understand more data faster, get it to the right people, and enabling efficiencies within teams, I think, obviously will be a trend that continues into 2025. Now, that being said, AI is not a silver bullet. You listed a few of the challenges. The role of the analyst is certainly key to making sure that whatever AI bubbles up has the right context behind it, can be supported by the evidence. It is an efficiency creator. It is not a silver bullet, and so it needs to be utilized in the right way. But it's a part of our future, and it is a part of every piece of life that we go into, being our everyday lives, or the security sphere, or the industry at large, or companies at large. It will be a part of our lives, and in many ways for the better. There will be some challenges around it, and I'll probably come into some of those later as well.
I'm going to throw this out to Mike or Jordan if you've got any other comments, but I would love for someone to address, do you see the notion of mistrust of AI changing, and how does that change, or does it even change?
J comes before M in the alphabet, Jordan.
There you go. So I think you brought up a couple of good points. One is the security side. So I see with a lot of the companies we work with, they're building their own AI capabilities and trying to keep it in-house and training it on their own data. And I think that part is essential. to keep it in-house, keep your security right. So on that side, I think security is still a big issue. With security analysts, we don't necessarily trust sending off our data, nor should we, to these AI chatbots. I think it also helps, or will help in the future, on the visualization side. As Neil was saying, bringing in that big data and then being able to visualize it for clients. As Neil also said, I don't think that it will take the job of the analyst, at least I hope not. I think it's a great tool for dealing with your baseline analysis. And it really opens up your ability to work on the higher level analysis that we're all hired to do. So I think for me, that's the great part of AI, is being able to do that higher level analysis and leave the base organizational tasks to an AI.
I think to add to that, we've seen this saying go around the industry a little bit now, that intelligence and OSINT, you're at an advantage if you use it, you're at a disadvantage if you don't, and it's the exact same principle when it comes to AI. In terms of managing the risk of AI, if you look at intelligence and security operations, right, we need to make sure we finally balance accuracy, timeliness, relevance, and actionability. And the more weight you put on one, i.e. speed and timeliness, the more you potentially sacrifice on the other, and the balance then becomes unbalanced. In terms of how this then integrates in 2025, I think it's coming back to the principle of garbage in, garbage out. If we poorly direct AI, we're going to sacrifice actionability. So if we really stick to what it is we wanted to use and use it for that, and focus on harmonizing that, I think we'll go much further faster. If not, we'll just still be bumbling around with weird answers from large language models.
Very good. Thank you guys for that. Mike, funny, you just ended. I'm going to come to you with the next prediction to get you to weigh in on it. And I'm going to read it again, word for word. In 2025, we can expect to see 2 to 3 massive supply chain attacks. Organizations will need to prepare for faster and more targeted attacks and increase their focus on compliance, cyber insurance, and prevention. What makes this interesting to us when we found it was, we were coming at it from the perspective that even the regular layperson understands what a supply chain disruption can do to them, because think of COVID-19 and all the things that they lived through and what they saw. And that we know when those things happen, you can have a rise in crime, which again has a whole other layer of complexity for security teams. But I wanted to get your take on that prediction. Like, is there any validity in that? Do you see this with a different take or a different lens than what we did?
I would agree with it 100%. I think that when we say the word supply chain attacks, one of the things we kind of almost jump straight to is things like cyber threats to supply chains and direct actions targeting supply chains. If we look at arguably the highest profile supply chain attack in cyberspace this year, or cyber incident, let's call it, CrowdStrike. Not a cyber attack, to be clear, but it really showed the vulnerabilities and resiliency concerns in that type of environment. And if you go back a few years, WannaCry from not too long ago.
Yes.
But again, I think we have that assumption that these large sophisticated attacks on supply chains have to come from nation states, because who else has got that capability? If you look in the physical world, look at what the Houthis have done as a non-state actor over the past 12 months. So I think looking at 2025, yes, we are going to see these massive supply chain impacts as a result of attacks, but they don't have to be from a nation state. They can be by accident, and it can be from non-sophisticated actors, including things like hacktivists.
That's very valid. And I think you're right. That's a good point that you've raised, that people are looking to nation states to cause this type of disruption, but you have to have a more of a wider lens when you're looking for or listening for this types of threat. Neil or Jordan, do you all have anything you want to weigh in on before I move on to the next prediction?
I'll touch on that very briefly, but I think from our perspective, when we look at just the sheer volume of data out there, potential exposure of credentials, risk vectors, etc., that is increasing day on day, week on week. So sort of for companies to be aware of their potential risk vectors is critical to at least mitigating some of the risk of to Mike's point, not always nation states, but hacktivist groups that can be in various forums, etc., finding PII, finding potential compromised credentials that's out there that could be used as an attack vector.
There's I have about 3 or 4 follow-up questions to that, but I'm going to move on because I want to get on to the next prediction. Jordan, I'm coming to you with this one. So I don't think any 2025 prediction session would be thorough or complete if we didn't include, the recent U.S. election with President Trump being the president-elect. My question for you is kind of 2 parts. I want to know what the impression was or thoughts were for other political leaders around the world when they saw that President Trump was successful and won. And then how do those initial thoughts impact what we're going to see in 2025 geopolitically, if at all?
Sure. So I think, especially with Trump, it's useful to look beyond 2025, where I think we're witnessing a clear departure from the relative stability that we've enjoyed over the past probably 3 decades. I think actually Kissinger said during, and he's also a criticized politician, but Kissinger said during Trump's first term that Trump might be a historic figure who arrives to mark the end of an era. And I think what we're seeing right now is exactly that. In both the analyst and the political communities, there's been this assumption that the world was, stepping back from globalization, becoming more cautious around supply chain security, and further interested in geopolitical risks. And Trump was kind of seen as this outlier, as the anomaly rather than the new rule, especially when Biden came in. But I think the recent election really challenges that view. So where does that leave us? In a word, mostly just uncertainty. For the EU, I think it's a challenging moment. Europe has probably fallen short of preparing for the possibility of another Trump presidency. Macron's influence is waning. The German government is going through a coalition collapse. So without that strong political leadership from Germany and France, there's definitely more instability within the European landscape. And you kind of have this situation where, well, if the European political establishment is weaker, it's either going to have to completely follow America's wishes or step back and risk cooling relations while trying to balance China and Russia, or some sweet point in the middle. And then we can look at 2 other sides. We can look at China, where we're kind of getting 2 different fronts from the Trump team. One is he's definitely willing to tighten trade policy with China. We've seen that through his last term and through all of his rallies this term. But at the same time, he's also raised controversial points about Taiwan siphoning away America's semiconductor industry. He recently said that defending Taiwan is a stretch because it's so far away. So both of these things at the same time are probably going to intensify the situation. And then we can look at the Middle East, where we're already kind of seeing Middle Eastern leaders preparing for the new reality and staking their positions. I think last week, Saudi Crown Prince MBS voiced his strong criticism of Israel's actions in Gaza and Lebanon. But I think that was most likely a negotiation stance. He's trying to signal to Trump that if he wants normalization to occur, which he was strongly for in his first term, it's going to come at a higher price this time around. So you're going to see shifts in the global markets, alliances, and the security landscapes. And there's definitely going to be a growing interest from the corporate world in intelligence, forecasting, and security.
I want to follow up on something you just said, but before I do that, I want to give both Mike and Neil a chance to weigh in on that question.
Go ahead, Mike.
So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You know, there's 3 European pale male and stale individuals asking and answering a question around like American politics, right? First and foremost. But that being said, if you look at the past 12, 18 months, there's been a lot of questions around, are we going through the collapse of the rules-based order? You've got world leaders who have got arrest warrants on them that are freely able to travel, as an example, right? And I won't name who. And there's been other kind of international laws, regulations, and norm that has just been ignored in the sake of geopolitics or whatever you want to call it. Are we seeing the collapse of the rules-based order? No, but we are most certainly seeing the rise of the new world order and the new world of rules that comes with that.
It's interesting. That's actually quotable. I like that. It is. Neil?
Yeah, and I think history is the best teacher of the future in many ways. And you look at Trump's first term, and the continued dialogue around America first and stepping back from an interventionist policy to Jordan's point, in Europe, in Ukraine, potentially in Taiwan, etc. So I think, and actually to echo both my co-panelists, it's a continuation of that sea change, and we saw we saw the impact of that America First policy the first 4 years of the Trump presidency, and that will continue for the subsequent 4 years. And I think it's how the rest of the world starts to understand, learn, react. I think Jordan's observation of the European governments not being prepared necessarily for a second Trump presidency is absolutely accurate, and they're very quickly scrambling. But that being said, you look at many of the like minds that have been elected in recent years into European countries as well. So there will be some synergies found into newer European leadership, but with that might become some fragmentation of the old norms, especially under the umbrella of the EU.
Thank you. Jordan, when you were speaking, you had ended off by saying, I'm going to paraphrase, that we will see more corporate security teams looking for more intelligence. And is that because of uncertainty of what's to come, or is there something else that's driving that?
Yeah, I'm sure Mike and Neil can also speak on it. But I've seen probably over the past 3 years, with Ukraine, with Israel, already growing uncertainty, even with the pandemic. And it's only going to grow further as we kind of move away from this stable period that we had before.
Thank you.
I agree that increasing uncertainty. What I would add to that, though, is that what I'm seeing quite nicely in our space is that organizations are increasingly understanding the importance and the ability to reach out to intelligence team and go, hey, can I have some answers on this uncertainty? Yeah. Whereas before they would have just lived with the uncertainty.
The value of intelligence is increasing by the week, and as intelligence practitioners, it's a good place to be adding value to your co-workers and to your stakeholders.
Well, and great observation on how uncertainty would have been taken before, but how it is different and viewed differently today, where they're trying to find certainty in it. So that's a great observation. I want to touch on another prediction, and it is surrounding climate change. And I know I talked about AI, which is like something people talk about all the time, and climate change can, some will also say it's the same thing, but I think it's a different perspective on climate change. And Neil, I'm going to come to you with this one, and I'm going to read the prediction. Climate change is expected to significantly impact global politics and security by 2025, potentially leading to climate-related conflicts and mass migrations, which will require security teams in North America to incorporate environmental factors into their risk assessments and planning strategies. What makes this interesting for us, Neil, when we found this, we are obviously aware of environment-related demonstrations and civil unrest, but the whole concept of mass protests or mass migration, was interesting to us, and one that we never really think of, especially being here in North America. I want to know from you, how valid is this? Do you have a different take on this particular prediction?
Yeah, so I think obviously the environmental question is impossible to ignore. I mean, you look at even last week, week before, Valencia, and the flooding that occurred there, as a direct result of arguably global warming and changes in the environment. we're looking at the busiest hurricane season ever. Go back earlier in the year, there's flooding in Germany. So these regions that historically have not had major environmental challenges. Go back last year in Little Nova Scotia, major forest fires presented by heat, again something that we've not had up here in Little Nova Scotia. And so climate change is something that cannot be ignored and will continue to impact security operations, be it from a supply chain risk perspective, be it from a travel risk perspective, etc. Mass migrations possibly not next year in mass migrations, but certainly you look at the flow of individuals from Africa into Europe, from Latin America into North America. That's driven by a number of things, not least obviously socioeconomic challenges, but socioeconomic challenges are often led by environmental challenges, and so all of these things have a knock-on effect and a domino effect that means that security teams cannot ignore the bigger picture of environmental challenges, and that's even before you get into again, if we come back to Valencia, the unrest that was caused directly as a secondary effect of the environmental outputs.
Valid. Anybody want to weigh in on that before I move on to my other question?
I'll jump in quickly. I think the climate one is a really interesting one because it's so slow rolling that
Yes,
it seems like it's quite a difficult one for people to comprehend or decide, how are we going to solve this massive Mother Earth issue at our corporate level. But I think, like, as Neil said, maybe not in 2025, but there are going to be issues that come out of this. I mean, and opportunities probably. I mean, there's going to be rapid, if there is these mass migrations, there's going to be rapid growth of demand in some areas. Some areas may struggle to retain skilled workers. But I think these are issues that I think are in the corporate side we're less tapped into, or I haven't seen people dealing with these issues in the same way that they would deal with supply chain issues because of conflicts in Ukraine or conflicts in the Middle East. So it's something that I think people have a hard time grasping, but definitely something that we need to work on in the corporate side and in the security industry.
Well, it is definitely one of the slow-moving phenomenons. So you're right, and when something moves at that pace, it's hard for someone to say, "Well, this is an issue." I'm not saying it's not an issue, but it's hard for you to take a report to your executive team saying, well, we should really be looking at this.
Yeah, it's like people focus on, this area gets hit by hurricanes, we need to focus on the hurricane. But the larger, like, second order risks of like migration and, skilled workers moving, growing demand in areas, those kind of things, people don't seem to be thinking about as much.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I have more predictions, but I want to make sure I ask you all one general question and give you all a chance to respond. And Mike, I'm going to start with you. And the general question is there one theme or one thing that you see for our industry morphing or changing in 2025? Like, if there's that one thing that you're like, hey, this is not going to be like this for long, and I could see X, Y, and Z changing, what will that be in general?
But both an assessment and to dare say it, not without introducing bias, a hope. I hope that the industry, as we continue to understand the importance of things like intelligence within decision making, security risk management, etc., I hope that we begin to really implement intelligence as it's intended within the domains of threat intelligence, protective intelligence, and at-risk intelligence. We use those terms very much interchangeably. Threat intelligence is threat-centric. Bad guys and girls, what are their intents, motives, capabilities. Protective intelligence, the asset-centric approach, where we want to safeguard something from harm. And then risk intelligence, which is what is the risk of the threat and protective intelligence to the business? What is the so what to us? And it's really important for us to really start understanding, embracing that, because security gets that bad rep for being the cost center. It's not, it's a business enabler. If you can then use risk intelligence to translate that directly to business value, we're on to a win. So I think it's both an assessment and, personally speaking, a hope.
I like that. It's a business enabler. That's like, again, another quotable from Mike in this session. Neil, how about yourself? Is there anything that you think we'll see some transformation on in the industry next year?
Yeah, I think, and we started with it, and so I'll sort of somewhat bookend it with it. So, we cannot again avoid AI in the industry moving forward. I think to the earlier discussion, it's never going to replace analysts. It's only there as an aid to analysts, and so there's that opportunity piece. Actually, I think to Mike's point, there's the risk and the opportunity. So there's the opportunity piece of doing more with the capabilities that you have around you, and being able to be more of that co-pilot to your organization if we continue down that co-pilot theme. Now, there's also security elements that we discussed, and doing that in a safe environment is obviously critical to the tools you use. The other element of the security challenge is actually, from the risk side, is the potential misinformation, disinformation campaigns, fake images, etc. The utilization of AI enables bad actors to create. So there's that other side of AI and the challenges that we see. So both risk and opportunity, like all these things in the world, that comes with both sides of the coin.
Very valid. Because we've talked about AI being a useful co-pilot, but not about the risk that it now also opens up. So, Jordan, yourself, is there one thing that you think will transform in the industry next year?
Sure, I'll stick with the hopeful side that Neil and Mike both said. I think one of the things is that the security industry is always quite siloed. And security teams are not so sure about sharing intelligence between themselves. And I think that's something that I've started to see in the last year and a half, where there's more interactions between companies. Companies are more willing to share intelligence if they have collaboration efforts. And I think that's definitely a big opportunity for the security industry. How do we collaborate together while, keeping our assets secure?
That's a very valid and good point, and a great way to, I think, to kind of end our session today. What would be fun is connecting with you guys November 2025, playing this back, and then doing another live to be like, how accurate were we? How good were we? For now, I want to thank you all my panelists, Neil, Mike, Jordan, for taking the time to chat with us today in terms of 2025 predictions for cyber and threat intelligence. Thank you all very much, and thank you to everyone who was watching our LinkedIn Live. And that's it. Thanks, folks.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Thank you.